Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Eric Frost, managing partner at Demos and partner at Zeus Jones. They are a creative consultancy focused on strategy and design with a mission to keep creativity at the heart of problem solving while envisioning future possibilities. They have worked with some of the world's most iconic companies, including Nike, Apple, Chipotle, Meta, 3M, General Mills, Nestle, and Fidelity. They are recognized as a B Corp, underscoring their commitment to ethical and sustainable business practices. And while that's an impressive roster of clients, what makes Eric's approach truly unique is his creative capital model at Demos, where he doesn't just invest money, but provides world-class creative services that help startups gain a competitive advantage. By helping these companies develop the best brand, story, and positioning, he's essentially de-risking their growth and helping them stand out in emerging markets. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefits.com. All right, back to our guest today, founder, managing partner at Demos, Eric Frost. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, Eric, so you got your start in the earliest days of the commercial internet. After earning a graduate degree in creative writing in San Francisco, you joined an interactive agency building the very first websites for brands like Patagonia and Land Rover. Eventually led you to Sapient and then Fallon, big agencies, big name agencies, top agencies at the time. Eric, I would love to kind of zoom in on this early chapter in your life for a moment before we talk about that creative capital model at Demos. So from your perspective, what was it like being on the digital side of brand building at a time when people still didn't really understand what the internet was?
I mean, for me, it was a dream job at the time. I'm someone who's always been an early adopter in my personal life, a lover of technology. So these brands and this technology and information becoming more accessible at the early days of the internet was a super exciting time. At the same time, totally new, very wild west. We were working through browser compatibility issues on these websites all the time. The website wouldn't look the same as it was. The tools were very archaic at the time. It was a challenge. It was always like a creative problem solving challenge to take what the designers would come up with and translate that into the website at that time, because it was just, the technology was so much early. It was harder to express the brand in the way that you wanted and deliver the type of, even though that experience was breakthrough, the idea that you could say shop for Patagonia clothing on a website as opposed to a catalog was breakthrough. But, these are the best brands in the world. They have very high standards for how their brands show up and the experience they're delivering to consumers. And that was very challenging. But, just like any new technology, it rapidly improved. And, by the time I was at Fallon working on, say, a website for BMW, you could do so much more than you could even just a few years prior.
So I had a business involved in the early days of internet design as well. I exited in 2001, and we were still dealing with a lot of browser-like interoperability issues. Have those largely been resolved, or is that something you still wrestle with?
No, that's largely been resolved. And a lot of the sort of archaic tools that we use to create layouts, you can do just about anything. I mean, you can do programmatic animation at this point. You can do all sorts of stuff. It's pretty amazing. And now with the advent of AI and AI being able to just custom code websites and applications for people, I feel like we're about to take another massive leap forward in the technology. And I stepped away from actually coding probably in about 2003, 2004.
Oh, it's been a while.
So it's been a
Yeah.
while. I haven't been up to speed recently, and whenever I encounter any of that, I'm so amazed at where things have gone to and what you can do. Pretty much anything is possible at this point.
Yeah. So, can you remember a moment where it really hit you, Eric, that the way that brands interact with customers was completely changing, just unfolding in front of your eyes?
Yeah. So when we were at Fallon, I think seeing how customers were starting to participate and actually starting to create and shape how brands were sort of operating online. So taking some of the brand elements and sort of recasting or reshaping them for themselves, be that in social posts, in sort of as Web 2.0 started to emerge, or on blogs, or remixing them on T-shirts or clothing, or things like that. We started to see, even back then, the early days of what we call like participatory brands, where, as opposed to this idea from mass communications where a brand is something that the brand decides they're going to stand for this one thing, and you deliver that message over and over again through mass communications, and you beat it into people's heads. It was really started to be more of a conversation between consumers and brands about what the brand stood for, the products and services that the consumers wanted from the brand, and helping shape the future of those things. So we saw brands like Starbucks and Google and all of these brands emerging that weren't shaped by advertising and mass media. They were really shaped by the internet and internet culture, which was much more participatory, much faster moving, and much more of a sort of community feel. Like the community really felt like they owned part of that relationship with the brand, as opposed to this top-down mass communication model.
Was there one or maybe a small handful of brands that seemed to really pioneer this approach?
At the time, when we were at Fallon and thinking about sort of pioneering this new approach that eventually led to us leaving and starting Zeus Jones, we were looking at brands, more specifically some of the kind of tech native or tech oriented brands like the Googles and Facebook at the time, but even traditional brands like Nordstrom that were built on a much more service model. Like the legendary service was the thing that everyone talked about. So what we wanted to do was work with companies and brands and figure out what is that sort of most viral part of the interaction. What is the most valuable part of the interaction that everyone else is going to talk about or pass on? So in the early days of Google, that might have been how much better Gmail was, or how much better Google was as a search engine than anything else. The early Starbucks experience of, like, for the first time coming to this third space in the United States, where it had these amazing products and amazing food, and you really felt like you could hang out there and interact and really gather. Those were entirely new ways of building brands at the time, as opposed to mass communications, deals, banner ads, all those kind of things that felt very transactional, felt very one way, and they felt very interruptive. Didn't feel like it was delivering a lot of value to consumers. So we were really asking ourselves, like, what is marketing, or what is a way of building a brand that delivers and builds value, that feels participatory, and that invites consumers in to a deeper relationship, not a transactional relationship?
So I'm kind of going back through my memory banks, and it seems to me that maybe all of this kind of got started or kicked off or was possible because of Facebook specifically. Am I right? Was that the only platform? Were there earlier ones that I'm not kind of thinking of that sort of allowed this brand and consumer participation to come together?
Yeah, I think at the same time Facebook was coming up, it was sort of like, we sort of moved from Web one, we always refer to as that was the read era. I'm a passive consumer. I'm consuming this. Web two was write, which is like I've been invited to now create. So from platforms like Blogger and Tumblr, and early social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, that was where you really started to see this brand evangelism. People really kind of, early days of what we now would call influencing with brands, taking assets, giving feedback, new recipe ideas, new content, like that sort of interaction just became much more possible in those early days. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Facebook was one of the big cultural forces at the time. We spent a lot of time building up, brand communities on Facebook at that time.
So how would you characterize where we are now with sort of, the graph of this trend, and where do you see it going that may not be super obvious to the average layperson?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been interested in, it's funny because this movement has been maybe a little bit hijacked by the AI narrative, but I think might actually end up blending in the end with the AI narrative is, so once again, I'll revisit. Web 1 was read. I'm a passive participant. Web 2 was write. I've been invited into this thing. However, the sort of means uh, of production, all of the search engines, all of the data is still controlled by a few large parties. It's the Googles, it's the Metas, it's the Microsofts of the world. Web 3.0, which a lot of people would refer to as crypto or blockchain, I like referring to it as Web 3.0 because it does feel like this next iteration of the internet is what we're calling the own era of the internet, where these communities or people are invited into the actual infrastructure and to participate much more fully in the economy that's forming around this next era of the internet. So the idea that communities are going to own and participate in value creation and value extraction is much different than a lot of the value accruing up to, say, a few very large companies, which honestly, those same companies are dominating AI. So that's why I think it's going to be interesting to see how AI versus Web3 starts to play out, especially as we deal with things like data rights and data sovereignty. The blockchain, in some ways, is a very elegant tool to deal with a lot of those problems. If we have an immutable ledger that very transparently says, this is where this thing came from, this is who owns this data, this is who created this art, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see how those things evolve, co-evolve, and how they continue to interact.
Can you maybe give a specific example of what it is that you're envisioning or thinking about? You're talking about individuals being able to participate from an economic standpoint more. Is this sort of like the idea of like, I would truly own my data on Facebook and kind of lease it back to them, kind of a thing?
That's a very good example. So if you think of medical data is very high value at this point, but consumers, it's these patients' data. They have no ownership over it, and they're not compensated in any way. However, a lot of that data is shared or resold currently on the market by other companies that say might use that in clinical trials or to set up research or to set up now AI models to do like sort of AI driven research for new drugs or different therapies or things like that. So if you're thinking about someone owning through the blockchain all of the medical data, especially, it's interesting because the most valuable data comes from the people who generally have the highest healthcare expenses. So people who have rare diseases or conditions or multiple conditions, that data is extremely valuable. And if we could help offset some of their personal costs, but also the cost of the system by valuing this data and sharing that value back with people, you start to create a whole different sort of economy and ecosystem around healthcare and health data and how that data is used, and how the sort of value of it accrues to different parties.
What's the likelihood of something like this materializing? Because it seems like it flies in the face of the incentives for the people who are basically in control of our data now.
Yeah, it does indeed.
Okay.
Very much so. That's why I think, and that's one of the things that's bad when you have a few companies that basically control the sort of modern infrastructure of the internet, because it de-incentivizes innovation. So if you look at, there are parts of the internet that are open protocols, like for example, TCP and email, and you still see lots of innovation and third-party tools and things being built on that. But what is the innovation to build tools and apps and things at this point on, say, Facebook? So there's no real incentive for innovation there because Facebook controls the entire market. They control what apps are or aren't allowed in the ecosystem, and they control all the monetization of that. So one of the things I think is bad about the current Web 2.0 sort of system and the way it's controlled is we've stifled innovation. In the Web 3.0 world, I think, a lot of this is going to be consumer demand or people sort of moving towards better models. If, say, a company, a ride sharing company spun up and you knew that the drivers through tokens or the blockchain were part owners of this whole system. I think a lot of consumers would preferentially move to a service like that because it would have more social capital. Because you'd know that these people were earning a living wage, it would be transparent. You'd know that they were owners partially in the system. So it's a little bit like the traditional co-op model of, say, grocery stores, where you can go. There's a community ownership. The community has a voice. They're able to vote on certain initiatives and help determine the future of the service or the business. So I think a lot of people would naturally gravitate. That the nature of it would give you a competitive edge over some certain services that are in the market today.
Do you see anything either from a technological or a social perspective being a hurdle to still overcome to get to some of these ideas?
Yeah, I think the reason why Web3 hasn't caught on and hasn't had more mass adoption is we don't have like the killer app yet. I think in the same way that most people, like when I reference TCP and internet protocols and stuff, are like, what is that? I don't even know what that is because it's entirely seamless and transparent to them. The internet just works. I open up my browser, I open up my computer. That's what's great about AI too. I just chat with something and it delivers me this value. And I think Web3 is on the verge of getting to that point, and all the apps and services that are being built that will seamlessly deliver, where I don't have to go exchange dollars for tokens and I don't have to go open up a separate blockchain wallet in order to navigate these services. All of that will be kind of done away with, and you'll have a more seamless kind of interaction like you do with the current internet. And I think we need to get to that point for it to be something that sort of allows for that sort of mass adoption and shift where we truly go from a Web 2 world to a Web 3 world.
Okay. Let's come back to now Eric's path.
Yeah.
Back to Fallon. You're getting a lot of great experience there. What was going on that sort of gave you the inspiration, the idea to go off and start your own thing with Zeus Jones?
Yeah, so I was working in a small group there that was Fallon Interactive. So it was really the people who had come from that sort of web world, who had spent a lot of their professional careers um, adopting that new technology. Sorry, one second. I'm just going to quit out of a chat here. Adopting new technology, pushing the way that brands were being built. We were already sort of practicing these new, much more dynamic ways of building brands, building services, doing all that stuff. So we were already kind of thinking that way. The larger agency was still stuck in sort of that more mass media mindset. So we were pushing the boundaries and really experimenting with how brands were built. We were doing things like branded entertainment, where, Amazon films, shoppable experiences, shoppable music videos for Nordstrom, obviously pushing the boundaries on digital and websites and how shopping was happening there. But we were looking for
Are you talking
entirely
about like
new.
product placement kinds of things? Like inside
Yes.
these movies?
Yeah, so it was everything from Fallon was an agency that created what I think many people credit as the first branded entertainment films. They created a film series online called BMW Films with Clive Owen, where there were these action films. The insight was, where is the car the star? And the answer is action films. So BMW partnered with all these, from Guy Ritchie to Ang Lee to all these amazing directors to create short films that really featured BMW vehicles and then gave them away for free on the internet. So we just hit this point where it was possible to start streaming high quality short films on the internet. So it was a sort of perfect intersection of this insight of, well, we can deliver content directly to consumers. We can do this in a high quality way. It's basically more exciting than watching an ad. It's content, but it's showing the ultimate driving machine, which was BMW's tagline at the time, in the perfect scenarios of these action films. And you have this guy, the driver, Clive Owen, who is on these missions where the car is really the tool that he's using to accomplish these missions.
Gotcha. Okay, so you guys were at Fallon. You were kind of pushing the boundaries on all of this, and you wanted to do more of it. That was kind of the reason to go off and do your own thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's interesting because there are different periods of sort of internet adoption, like we saw, and you probably experienced this from the early times. There was this massive boom, and then there was a crash in about 2001. Everyone's sort of getting laid off. People were saying stuff like the internet was over. Well, that was fun, but now the internet's over. And then really everyone just quietly kind of kept building, and then added this other layer of functionality that Web 2 then created this boom. True e-commerce, social media, all that kind of stuff that happened. And Web3 has gone through similar sort of bust boom kind of cycles where everyone's like, well, blockchain's dead. It's like, well, everyone just keeps building. AI has seen similar narratives. So one of the things I've learned through my time as a business person is like truly what the adoption curve actually looks like and the different stages of adoption of new technology, and to never really believe something is dead or over, because really it's just quietly building in the background and it's going to hit mainstream inflection again in a couple of years and in a much bigger way. So that's one of the things I've sort of learned, which has helped me as an investor as well understand those sort of bust and boom cycles and what signals to pay attention to and what signals to ignore.
I mean, I think you hit on something key there, right? Because the hype cycle, we've seen it over and over and over again, right? The early days of the internet, right? Come 2000, 2001, when we had the bubble pop, people were saying, oh, yep, the internet was a fad. There's no use. Like, this is going to fade away. And people who were actually using it and building on it knew that that wasn't true. It was just,
Yep.
the hype had kind of leveled out. We saw it with blockchain. We're seeing it to some degree with AI now, and it's hard.
Yes.
When you're in the midst of that hype cycle, it's hard to separate the hype from the true value, right?
That's absolutely right. And I think the thing that's getting interesting is the cycles are getting shorter as well. And it will be interesting to see what effect AI has on those cycles as AI makes culture and business and innovation move even faster. Like, do those cycles get even shorter? Are we talking about, instead of years, we're talking about 3 to 6 months between these different cycles? Now, it'll be fascinating to see what happens.
And so, as you guys started Zeus Jones, and you were really aggressively, excited about this new participation model, kind of getting the consumers and the brands to sort of have that conversation together. How was this received by the marketplace? How were clients kind of opening up to it?
Yeah, it was a really interesting time because a lot of people knew, in the early days of social media and digital now having a very firm foothold, e-commerce being a force, knew that how brands were being built and how advertising and how marketing was being done was changing. So there was a lot of doom and the gloom. You'd open up advertising sites like Adweek, and every week there'd be an article about the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But the interesting thing was no one had any answers for what's next. And one of the things that we've always been excited about is like being part of the voice and the thought leadership that helps people determine what's next and helps take these big, especially traditional brands, usher them into that next position of leadership by bringing what's next to them. So what we were excited to do was come out and really rewrite the rules of marketing and how brands were being built based on a lot of these examples that I mentioned earlier, the Starbucks, the Googles, even the Nordstroms, but the Nikes of the world, how they were adopting this much more innovative model. And then we went and had those conversations with these big Fortune 100 companies. And what was interesting is they were you could see them sort of relaxed in the room. We had this side by side chart that we used to say, like, that's the $1 million chart, because it would unlock projects instantly. So it took us a while to arrive at this, but when we got to the side by side, we literally said, this is the way you've been practicing marketing on the left. These are the new rules of how modern brands are being built. And when we got to that slide, you could literally see people physically relaxed in the room and be like, finally, someone is bringing me a new methodology and a new way to build my brand and to move forward. And I recognize all these things and I've been feeling them, but I don't know how to get there. And so really what made Zeus Jones very successful in the early days and catch on was that fundamental philosophy and that side-by-side chart and that recognition of, like, we know and we can help transform you to this new way.
And what was that new way? What specifically were you outlining on that magical $1 million slide?
It's a lot of the things that we've been talking about. It's like building a community around your brand, recognizing that brands are now participatory elements, that your consumers want to have a say and they want to have a voice. They want to interact with you. They just don't want to hear from you and be marketed to. They want to tell their friends about services and value you're delivering to them, not just the messaging. We had a very early mantra that was in all of our decks was like, actions speak louder than words. A brand should be built on the value you deliver, and what you do is much more important than what you say. What you say can catch someone's attention, but if you're not delivering value, if it's not a compelling product experience, if everything underneath the veneer of the marketing isn't best in class, isn't solid, isn't amazing, they're going to move on to the next thing, because there's now with the internet, they know all the options that are out there. There's more options than ever. And you really need to stand out and deliver an amazing experience.
So for people listening, maybe they own a small brand or a big brand, or they're working at one. What's a piece of low hanging fruit that you can give them? Like, here's something we see a lot of brands miss. You put it in place. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't, convert you into a unicorn overnight, but this is a big lever to pull.
Yeah, a lot of what we do with our clients, big or small, no matter what size, is really look out. We pride ourselves on being like very in tune with what's happening in culture. And I think that cultural resonance is the thing most companies, big and small, miss. It's funny because even startup companies, I think you have a founder who's very passionate. They understand what's missing or how to unlock or create a better experience in a certain market. They understand the culture in that moment. But as they build their company and as they start to scale it, they don't continue to keep pace with how culture is evolving. So a lot of companies, sometimes they're small, sometimes they're big, very established companies. We generally sense they've lost sense, and this happens more and more because culture is evolving faster and faster. They've lost sense of the cultural resonance of their brand, their product, and what they need, how they need to be connecting to communities. So really what we do is the first part of any fundamental brand strategy we do is we're looking at deep consumer insights. We're looking at culture, how culture is evolving, and we're bringing those cultural and consumer insights to those brands and generally reshaping what those brands stand for and how they're delivering those products.
Okay, now here's the part of the conversation I'm really excited to get to, is to finally transition into how did Zeus Jones sort of spawn this idea of what you're doing at Demos? How did this door open up?
Yeah, so I would say we've been doing demos for about 4 years. So we're about 15 years in. We were working with some of the best brands in the world, looking at the sort of long-term strategies of how their categories are evolving. So we did a project with Nike about the future of sport. We did a project with Nestle about the future of food, with Mayo Clinic about the future of healthcare. We were looking at these big sort of category and societal shifts, sort of the ultimate version of that cultural fluency that I was talking about earlier. Like, how is the world going to evolve in this area in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And because we're doing this deep strategy that went all the way up to the C-suite, one of the things we saw is these big companies, they have lots of resources, but one of the things that they're not great at is moving quickly and taking advantage of opportunities and innovation. So a lot of times the way they're realizing these opportunities is through acquisition, through M&A activity, buying companies that help them deliver or take advantage of these new value streams or shifts in the market. So we realized M&A was going to be a massive part of these people's strategy. And I think that was the original impetus to say our best way to participate in that is to go out and help startups sort of build their services and build their companies in a way that connects to the way that we know these categories are evolving and the way that we know that these big strategic players are thinking about the future of these different categories and, say, food, transformation of agriculture and the food system, transformation of health, and transformation of, say, financial services and financial equity and things like that.
And so you start doing this, you start going and, doing some work for these startups and, kind of giving them this big picture vision and all the skill sets that you guys have access to. And how rewarding was that?
It was immensely rewarding. I think we knew that we could add value. We didn't understand what an unlock and unfair advantage, honestly, bringing world-class branding to these early-stage startups who otherwise couldn't afford this level of branding and talent and brand strategy experience would be to catapult some of these early-stage companies to category leaders within some of these emerging categories. So, and what we saw was that not only did that allow these companies to become leaders, but it allowed us as someone who was a sort of fledgling fund in this category to really get into deals we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get into with some of the much more established, bigger players in the venture capital space.
Are there other folks doing this kind of model where, because I mean, the way you're describing it, Eric, it sounds like, your work at Demos is almost like a cheat code for these startup companies. It's like, you've got the vision, you've got the talents, you've got the skills. You've done this for brands that are just starting to come about. You've done this for big established brands. Like, you've got the playbook, and you put that on top of, a great product or great service that is in its early days, and it's like gas on the fire.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly like to think of it as a cheat code, and I think our VC and investment partners and the startups we partner with certainly think of it that way. It took us a while to sort of refine and arrive at the way the model is now. There are a couple other firms that are doing it. There's some friends of ours on the East Coast called Bullish that are doing it, but they're laser focused on sort of consumer brands and consumer products. That's where their expertise is. They're delivering services outside of the companies that they invest in, and we're actually going to start to do that at Demos as well. Whether or not we're investing with you, we feel like we have a model that now works for early stage companies, and that honestly was always a struggle at Zeus Jones. We struggled to make the same sort of financial structures that we were working with Nike work for these small companies, which is why, honestly, investing made sense. It was the first time we were able to actually work with these companies because we had skin in the game. So over-investing suddenly made sense because there was long-term value. It was a long-term partnership. But ultimately, the next evolution of Demos now will be we're actually going to build a small creative studio inside of the fund who will be directly delivering those services as opposed to using Zeus Jones resources. So we're going to take everything, all the expertise, everything I've learned in my career and my founding partners have learned in their careers. We're going to bring that into Demos, but build a nimble team that works at the pace and the financial structures that work for these early stage companies.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, when you're working with somebody like Nike, they've got a budget that can support, the types of talent that you guys need to bring in for these projects. When you're working with a startup, they could certainly benefit from your skills, but they don't have the same kind of budget. And so now you guys can get creative, the creative capital model that we've been referencing here. And so I'm curious, how do most of these deals come about? Is this you kind of going around like knocking on doors, or are they finding you?
It was sort of us either through existing Zeus Jones relationships or looking at trends, investment trends, and then going on and finding startups that met that. That I would say that was the early days. Now we've really established through the case studies and the work that we've done and the value add we've shown with some of our companies in our very first fund. We now have a track record that basically is attracting people, and we have lots of people coming to us. So we'll look at, I think we've looked at 1,700 deals in the last 6 months to get to probably 4 investments. So we're going through an enormous amount of these companies, and we're only picking the very best opportunities that have undeniable momentum, where it feels like our strategic fit and the strategic advantage we bring to the table can truly be that unlock, and where we have connections to potential partners or big strategic companies that can also be a value add in those relationships as well. So, in the ag space, that might be a partner like Land O'Lakes. In the medical space, it's Medtronic and Mayo Clinic and people like that we can hopefully bring partnership, or at least the possibility of partnership, to these investment opportunities.
When you say bring partnership to the investment opportunity, like additional funds in, or like some kind of like I don't know, like you mentioned Land O'Lakes, like they're going to be like a co-packaging partner, or what do you mean by this?
Yeah, so Land O'Lakes has a massive co-op of farmers. I think in some form or fashion, they have about over 40% of the acres under management in the United States is part of a Land O'Lakes co-op in one form or another. So if you have, say, a new nano agronomy play that replaces insecticides in row crops, if Land O'Lakes isn't interested in what you're doing, you're probably not going to be able to scale that company because they're such a massive player. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll go to a partner like that and we'll even vet the idea before we invest. That's one of the ways we can uniquely do due diligence is we bring in those key strategic players through our relationships. And then we ask them, are you interested in trying this? Like, is this something you'd be interested in, bringing to your co-op network and trying out? Same thing with a Mayo Clinic. And sometimes we'll look for deals who are already in conversation or working with Mayo Clinic, and we know that we can even maybe further advance those, or we know we can help, make sure that relationship stays strong. We look for those true partnership opportunities where it's about either co-product development of a new service, or that, that Land O'Lakes or Medtronic might be the end customer or even the end acquirer of this startup company.
That's really interesting because it occurred to me that the big thing that you guys would be looking for is, can they benefit from sort of, I don't know, a rebrand or our expertise in, being able to build that participation between the community and the brand. And I'm sure that that's part of it too. But the big thing that you're talking about here is the ability to connect them with other folks that you've got great relationships with.
That's absolutely right. And if they can do that, they're much more likely to make it to that next stage down the venture capital chain. So the whole game is about how do we get you to the next stage of funding, the next stage of development. When those partnerships are enormously important as a part of that, that's a signal to the rest of the market that these people are going to be a leader. They're being taken seriously by the most important players in the market. And that creates, a very advantageous situation for them. So we really see the branding as, yes, it helps establish you as a category leader, but with that comes an unlock of more investment, an unlock of more partners, whether it's partners we're bringing to the table or partner conversations they're in. A tighter brand, a better story makes people want to partner with you. It attracts the best talent. So we see it as an unlock on numerous fronts.
Can you talk about any of the companies that you are currently doing work with, or maybe you've sort of completed your work cycle with them at Demos that would be a great case study? You're super excited about what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a great example of a brand, and this one could maybe speak to some of the kind of connections and things we're able to form as well. There's a brand called Shield AI. What they do is they create what they call a physical AI agent. So it's a device that goes in the corner of a hospital room. It has a camera and it has AI built in, and it tracks every surface in a hospital room or an operating room that's touched. And then as soon as someone steps out of that room, within 12 to 20 seconds, it can use UV light to disinfect every space that's been touched in the room. And it does it much more accurately than someone who's manually cleaning or bringing in just a UV tower. So they've proven through studies with Stanford Hospital and with Loma Linda that they can 96% more effectively eliminate bacteria and bioburden. And that's just the start of what they do. They also can monitor bed rails and patient falls and hand washing and ORs and tools and compliance and all sorts of stuff. They're continually adding services to help these hospitals be safer, more efficient, and just, automating kind of the future of healthcare and healthcare intelligence. So that's a complicated story. So helping them tell that story in an effective way, because it's not just about disinfection, it's really about the future of intelligence and healthcare intelligence and automation. So helping them paint that vision, connecting them to some of the players like the eco labs in the world who currently are involved in disinfection and cleaning in a lot of those hospitals. So Ecolab is a client of ours. They already had some relationships there, but we can help them on that front. But yeah, just rebranding, making sure they don't look like they're all brilliant engineers. They don't know anything about design and marketing. But if we can make them look like someone that would be partnered with Mayo Clinic, or when Mayo Clinic looks at them, it's like, we're proud to share their materials. We're proud to have them associate with our brand. That goes a long way to making sure those introductions are successful. And honestly, they're like a poster child right now for every time we talk to them, they've signed up 10 new hospitals. They're like off to the races. They're absolutely amazing. So that's one of those examples of undeniable momentum when I say we're looking for. It's like,
So it's obviously more than just cameras and data, although that's
yep,
huge because you're talking about being able to like direct UV light to
that's right.
do disinfecting. And this is all sort of within the same unit, or
It's,
the camera
yep.
unit communicates to the UV unit.
No, yeah. The camera and the UV is all in the same sort of small little box that sits up in the corner of the room, and can disinfect everything in an, like I said, in an OR, a hospital room. And what's amazing about them is as the smart, what we would call the smart hospital of the future, as more patient sensors, all these things. There's lots of disparate devices that don't have a brain to sort of take all that data and input it and actually proactively act on it. So I think what we're our vision for them and what we want them to do, and I think they see this as well, is to really be the brain that can pull some of these smaller, more functional devices that can pull that data in, process it, make it meaningful and digestible to the hotel staff. Because I think one of the reasons that the Shield AI um, device is catching on right now is because of post-COVID hospital staffing is just really difficult. The healthcare system is overburdened. They're really short-staffed. So if we can bring in something that actually reduces their costs and makes it safer and reduces that burden on the human staff, but also makes them feel like they're safer as well at the same time, they're not going to get an infection from these improperly cleaned rooms or, dealing with patients. That's why I think they're catching on so fast. And it's like a sort of viral product at the moment because they're just had that perfect market fit for the cultural moment we're in, where we're seeing, a greater burden on the hospital system through all the, what be it COVID or the other norovirus or different things that are going around. We have staff that's burned out, so people are exiting the healthcare space. But we can bring in the smart device and actually reduce costs and reduce that sort of staff burden at the same time.
So they probably have, and tell us the name of the business again. It's
It's Shield, spelled SHYLD, Shield AI.
great. We'll make sure we include a link to that in the show notes. So I'm sure that Shield has their hands full just sort of tackling the hospital market, which is enormous. Are there
Yes.
visions about like where else to take this? What other industries that this tech could be applicable to?
Absolutely. So I'd say that we like to say it's like AI for healthcare spaces. We don't actually use the word hospital because if you think of the sort of boomer generation, the amount of people who are going into senior care facilities, and that industry already being really short staffed, obviously any sort of retirement home, senior facility, these devices could be in as well. I'd say those are like those hospital slash healthcare adjacent spaces. But then you think of cruise ships, which, as we saw during COVID, were enormously restaurants and hospitality spaces, hotel rooms, all the places where you felt most vulnerable during COVID are amazing sort of early markets for this technology, honestly.
Let's talk about 3D printed batteries.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
got you've got somebody in your portfolio that you're pretty excited about in that space.
Yes, very interesting company. They're called Material, the first company in the world to ever successfully print a lithium ion battery. And what's interesting about that is, obviously, the majority of our battery infrastructure right now is overseas. And as we know, with tariffs and foreign relations, our supply chain is getting more and more complicated. So efficiently building out a domestic supply chain for batteries that don't look like Tesla's Gigafactory. They look like small 3D printers, that you can easily scale up, that are portable, that you can move to different spaces. That's really exciting. But I think what's especially exciting about what Material is doing when they 3D print batteries is they can do what's called conformal printing. So they can print the battery to fit the product, not the other way around. So instead of having to design your product around existing battery form factors and shapes, they can 3D print a battery that fits in the empty spaces or the available space of your product. So you're getting better power density, lower weight, a lot of design freedom in the way your product looks, the way it's shaped, the way it. So when we think of next gen wearables like augmented reality glasses, small earbuds, drones, things like that that have limited capacity, this is the perfect technology for any of those kind of emerging next gen tech spaces.
So I don't understand the construction of your typical battery. Obviously, there's some sort of the part that's the actual fuel cell, right? But then
Yep.
there's some wiring that goes to it. You're not 3D printing the wiring, but you're 3D printing everything that the wiring connects into. Is that an accurate way to think about it?
Yes. So if you think of a traditional battery, like a double A battery, even not just talking about the batteries that go in your Tesla or whatever, think of a battery. There's that round part on the top that they call a current collector. They've actually eliminated that in addition. So what they do is they have what are called nanowires that turn the entire surface of the battery into a something that charges or discharges. So that's part of what allows them this shape freedom as well as these nanowires. Like we've gotten rid of, there's no jumper. You don't hook the jumper cables onto the
That's what
current
I'm
collectors at the
envisioning.
top. Yeah, it's the whole surface of it becomes that sort of charge and discharge available surface. So that also creates a lot of design freedom, which is really interesting, especially in these next gen spaces.
So something like what you're describing and 3D printing in general, in my experience, is really great for prototyping. Do you
Yep.
see this being scalable? Can it not just be used to be like, okay, we're envisioning a new product. What would it be like if we constructed a battery of this shape and size and put it here? But okay, now we know that this is what we want. Now let's make 10,000 of them.
Yes. Yeah. So it is scalable. One of the things, it's scalable in multiple ways. So I would say they can scale it up to produce, if say someone needed 100,000 battery packs or batteries, that is very possible. One of the other things that's interesting is although the first thing they printed was lithium ion, they're actually chemistry agnostic. So they can print any chemistry of battery. But what's even more interesting is they can test those new chemistries really efficiently. So instead of having to build a facility to say do a sodium, dry sodium cathode battery, I'm not a battery chemistry expert, but there's all sorts of new ones that are coming out. They can just print that for you on their existing 3D printer. So you can iterate battery chemistry much faster without having to, have the capital expenditure of building out factories.
Have you actually seen the printing process, the manufacturing process?
I have, yeah. Yeah,
It
we've
sounds
seen it
fascinating to me.
in the lab. They're actually just got a new space and are scaling in their initial lab was outside of Austin. Their new lab is in Miami, in Miami. They just got a new warehouse. They're installing multiple printers there to sort of scale up for their first product, which will be coming out later this year, which they announced at CES in January. So this is real. Some of the stuff sounds like sci-fi, but these are real things. They'll be in products by the end of the year, and they're currently in development with multiple partners for future products as well.
Okay, one more. Is there another interesting Portco that you're excited to talk about
Yeah,
before
I
we
would
kind of move on to
say,
the next parts of our conversation? Because
yeah,
this is
absolutely.
fun stuff. Like I'm on the edge of my
It's
seat
super
learning
fun.
about this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. There's a really amazing company we're very excited about, which is funny. 'Cause right before we stepped in the interview, I saw them announce that China had arrived at a world first breakthrough in this space. Where I'm like, this is very frustrating because this company, Minutia, is doing what they called this world first breakthrough out of China for the last 2 years. So there's a company called Minutia that we invested in. Very uh, brilliant founding team, founded by a very passionate set of co-founders who've been living. Over half the team has been living with type 1 diabetes. So they wanted to really develop what they felt like was a viable cure and the thing that they wanted in their bodies to deal with type 1 diabetes. So what they do is they take stem cells. Stem cells are very malleable. So you can create stem cells that basically mimic the healthy cells from your pancreas that create insulin in the body. So they can inject in your forearm these stem cells, which are totally safe. They've been in certain humans for 2 years in a small trial, and your body just starts recreating insulin naturally again. So it's effectively a cure for type 1 diabetes in this non-invasive outpatient procedure that they're currently developing. So they're going into their next accelerated trial soon, which will then be one step closer to market ready. So of course, there's still probably a couple of years out yet from the market, but the idea that we have basically technology that's been proven, that's stable and safe, that can cure type 1 and also eventually type 2 diabetes is amazing to me. And participating in something like that and helping someone realize that vision is what makes the work we're doing at Demos so rewarding.
So let me see if I understand what exactly it is that they're doing. They have figured out a way to reprogram stem cells in a very specific output so that when injected into somebody, they just know to go and start producing insulin again, which is the problem that type 1 diabetics have, is that they don't have that capability naturally.
Yes, that's exactly right. So they're able to basically replace or restore that sort of healthy function so that you can just make and regulate insulin naturally. And the other exciting thing about what Manoush is doing, that there's a couple other companies that are also on similar paths. They're a little further behind. Like I said, there was just this announcement about them doing this with stem cells in China. Is what Manoush has is they have a nanotechnology built into those cells where they can use a very specific frequency of light to turn the cells off if there's a problem.
Yeah.
So it's effectively a kill switch that they can turn off the stem cells and basically sort of start over or reboot if they need to. That measure of safety is really important when you're dealing with something that can interact with the immune system of your body. So having that technology built in is honestly a game changer, and it's something that the FDA is looking at regulating for all cell therapies. Basically saying all cell therapies need to have this moving forward, but a lot of cell therapies have not even begun the development of this kind of safety measure. So the fact that Manoush has this, or can potentially license it to other cell therapies as well, is another reason why we're so
this
excited.
This could end
about
up being even the bigger technology out of sort of the two.
That's right.
Because it would apply to so many different use cases. And so how is the light actually applied? Is it like through the skin? Do you have to go in with a scope like under the skin?
Yeah, it's through the skin. They have part of their technology as well as they have like these sort of unique shaped cells that make it easy to track where the stem cells are. So they 99% of the time will just stay put, but they have this way of tracking and identifying through these very unique shaped cells. So once they find those cells, you just shine a very specific frequency of light. It's not something you would encounter in your everyday life. So it's not like you're going to be walking around with this and think you're cured and someone's going to shine a light to check your ID and
I was at the movies and all of a sudden
going to turn off. Yeah,
off.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very specific frequency. This is technology that's been developed and is being used in other purposes and other applications as well. So yeah, you can just basically communicate with the cells and tell them to turn off.
So you guys are in a very enviable position there at Demos. You've got the respect of large brands, big private equity and venture capital funds that know your work and know that you guys are the cheat code for a lot of these companies that they're investing in. You've got, what'd you say, 1,700 deals that you've looked at this year.
Yep.
You picked 4, like you could sort of cherry pick the best of the best. Where do you see this going? What does the future of Demos look like?
Yeah, so I think for us, the future really looks like building out, like I said, that studio model inside, and then scaling up to, our first fund had 5 companies. Our second fund will have 8 companies where we wrote slightly bigger checks. Our next fund will probably be 25 companies that we're investing in. So being able to make a bigger impact by writing more checks, maybe being more involved. We're sort of evolving our model to potentially provide ongoing marketing and brand support to these startups as well. So not just a moment in time as they're getting started, but potentially through the relationship and as they grow. Just scaling the impact that we're making, doing more in these categories to help, transform climate, ag, food, and health faster than what we're doing. And ultimately, like you said, Zeus Jones is a B Corp. We've always felt like business should be a force for good in the world and can be an enormously powerful force for good in the world. So the fact that we can more directly impact these startups, that are solving diabetes or helping hospitals be safer, like the fact that we can make more of that kind of impact is really where the future is.
Is there a reason that the services that you're providing to your portcos now are sort of like just a moment in time and not ongoing? Is it just sort of a limitation either of your own resources or what the startup company can afford?
Yeah, part of it was a limitation of the economic model. So the only way it worked is part of the initial deal. You could afford our services, but now we've restructured the services in a way that I think they're more affordable in an ongoing way. And as companies mature through that cycle and they're unlocking bigger and bigger rounds, we'll still be very efficient. I think it could be a sort of ongoing partner for these companies, both on the marketing and on the funding side.
Eric, what is your superpower?
I feel like my superpower is helping come up with innovative ideas that drive business. I feel like I've always been the person who can generate the ideas really quickly, which is why I've been an entrepreneur a lot through my life. And sort of after a while, after starting 4 or 5 companies, you start to get exhausted and realize I would rather just support other people on their entrepreneurial
It's a
journey.
lot of work.
But even in part of that journey, a lot of that is still generating these really innovative ideas for unlocking some of this growth and future things as well. So I feel like idea generation and really innovative breakthrough idea generation has always been my superpower. But I think a lot of that is driven by curiosity. And what I would say is like just being curious and wanting to learn about all these new companies and technologies. Like I didn't know anything about stem cells and nanotech, 4 months ago, but having to learn all about all of that so that we could properly due diligence minutia as we were investing. If you can't lean into that and you're not fascinated by that, then this is the wrong industry for you, because you have to constantly be learning, constantly staying up with what's happening in culture, what's happening in these markets. And I think just being relentlessly curious and consuming podcasts and media and everything you can get your hands on is a really important part of staying at the forefront of what's happening at the bleeding edges of culture.
Do you think people are just born either curious or not? Or do you think this is something that can be fostered? And
I
I'm
think it's
asking as a parent.
yes. I think that it's partly a personality trait, honestly, but I do think there's a lot of nurture built into that. I think it's the way our school system has evolved. I think maybe earlier educational models, like a love of learning and lifelong learning was more often encouraged. And now we've kind of gotten maybe a little over obsessed with passing tests and meeting metrics.
Mm.
So then that makes that personal drive or the role of a parent in fostering that lifelong love of learning and teaching people how to learn. I think that's even more critical if our education system isn't delivering that in the same way that it used to.
Any advice, either to parents or to employers or individuals who sort of say, I kind of want to coach this in myself or those who are around me?
I think giving people, and especially kids, the time and space to go after what they're passionate about. I think one of the things that I sometimes would get from my parents or people is like, or kids being told, for example, here's a good example, like a graphic novel isn't a book, so you can't read a graphic novel at school. I think any form of reading and a diverse set of reading across fiction, nonfiction, all of that should be encouraged. Anytime a kid or an employee or someone is really passionate and leaning into something, understanding that that's engaging them in their whole self and their interests and their passions and pursuits and encouraging those things, be that outside of work, and recognizing that that's a valuable thing they bring to work, their outside passions or the things that they're interested in digging into or diving into or learning more about at work. Encouraging those things, I think, is vitally important.
Quick, fun personal story along these lines. I've got 2 young boys, 9 and 10, and we want them to read more. And we're fine with it being a graphic novel. Great. Find the thing that you want and go for it. But we decided to give it an extra level of customization. So we worked on a Chat GPT prompt to where it will create a story for them based on characters that it gives, the kids give it. And we'll plug in sort of the grade level, that it should be at, the approximate reading time, and, 5 question quiz at the end. And so now the kids are, they're not just doing one story, they're sitting down and they're sort of building a series and a sequence, and they're taking the same characters to the next place. And the super proud dad moment sorry, we're going to turn this back to you in a second, but the super proud dad moment was when my youngest started going through and making these stories. And he's like, Dad, I think I'd just rather go write my own story. Like, it's not writing it the way that I want it. And I'm like, yes, that's even better. Go for it. And so he ran up to his room and he made a comic book.
That's great.
Yeah.
Very cool. I love that.
So we're talking about a lot of your successes, Eric, and there've been a lot of them. I mean, you guys have worked with some great brands. You've got a fantastic model with Demos going. You get to, pick from, the cream of the crop. But surely there have been challenges in your life that you've had to overcome, probably, some serious. I'd like to hear about one of those, how you got through it, and what you learned coming out the other side.
Yeah, I think, we sort of talked about my superpower was the idea generation. When I was in an advertising environment, one of my early partners who I would go on, he was my creative partner in that environment. And like any partner in a relationship, people bring different skills and strengths to those relationships. So my skill was coming up with the ideas, and his skill was helping sort of shape the storytelling and the presentation of the idea. So because we had that relationship, I never really honed those kind of presentation skills. As you can imagine in my life now, when we moved to Zeus Jones, there was no hiding behind anyone else or any account people or anything like that to present ideas to clients or to pitch your ideas in meetings. And now I'm constantly pitching startups, pitching to potential investors that we want to come into the fund. I have to get them really excited about these startups and tell these stories in a very rich and engaging way. So while I was a very good sort of written, coming from a creative writing background storyteller, presentations were a real sort of pain point and weakness for me. So in the early days of Zeus Jones, I would, stumble or potentially fail in some of these meetings and presentations and just not live up to what I felt like was the potential of the idea. And I really struggled in those days to figure out how can I get better at this? And really just getting more reps, getting very, very comfortable with the idea, learning how to really truly internalize the material so that you can present and pivot and be quick on your feet as people are asking questions and engaging you. And then sort of starting to master that, but then also helping other people as I had to mentor other creative people who were coming up in the organization who were struggling with the same issue, figuring out, okay, I figured this out for myself and I've gotten very good at this. I've had lots of exposure. I've presented at innovation conferences in front of massive audiences. I've done countless new business and client presentations. I pitched the agency and ideas over and over again. How do I now translate this to this next generation of people? That was, I think, another challenge and another task of like, okay, it's one thing to figure out this out for yourself. Now, how do I teach this to someone else who might be struggling with in a similar issue, but struggling for different reasons?
So part of the way that you figured it out was just more reps, right? You kept stubbing your toe and
yes.
Like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else. But did you have any mentors, any courses that you took, any sort of resources that you went to try to level up that skill set?
Yeah, I think listening to storytelling podcasts, but then also reading things like, for example, the book Story by Robert McKee. That's not about giving presentations. It's about compelling, how to create the most compelling screenplay. But even understanding in those situations, like how to create compelling dialogue and how to tell a really compelling story from one of the people who had really mastered that in Hollywood, and a book that's considered even though that's not a marketing book. Once again, I think being curious and looking outside of your immediate area for some of those really interesting inspirations. I think things like that are great. One of the startup leaders, CEOs we're working with, just read Phil Knight's book about his coaching career in basketball and said it was by far the best business book he's ever read. So I think looking at these adjacent spaces and taking...
You're talking about Bobby Knight?
No.
That would be the coach. Phil Knight is the Nike guy.
Oh, sorry. Phil Jackson. Sorry, I misspoke. Phil Jackson. It'd be Phil Jackson. Famous, obviously, of 90s
Chicago
Bulls and then the
LA
Lakers and all that. So, sorry. I misspoke. Phil Jackson. You're right. Phil Knight, shoe dog, Nike guy. Phil Jackson, basketball coach. Phil Jackson's book. And I think, there are lots of, that would be a very unconventional sort of CEO style as well. So I think there's something really interesting about the energy that he brought to those teams.
No. What's something you wish more people understood about your industry, Eric?
One of the things we're trying to do in Demos is bring an unconventional set of investors into the fund. So a lot of the people we're bringing in are first-time venture capital investors. We're sort of broadening the demographics or the profile of the typical venture capital investor. So a lot of them are business or agency leaders, people who have had successful business careers but want to continue to make an impact, want to be part of a community that's talking about all these things at the bleeding edge of culture and business. So I would like more people to understand that you can actually it's easier to get involved in venture capital than you think. It shouldn't be an exclusive club of West Coast, very wealthy elites who are just enriching more West Coast elites. It can be all sorts of people are involved. It's actually the best performing asset class of the last 20 years. So, thinking about maybe moving a small part of your retirement or a part of your net worth into something like venture capital. And I think there are lots of different venture capital companies. You can find one that's really values aligned. You can find one that's investing in your local community if you want that, or if you're passionate about climate and food and health transformation, you can find someone like us who's investing in those thematic spaces that are a personal passion or maybe an interest area of yours.
Hmm. Well, that's a good question then. Like, how would people get in touch with you? Follow your story, contact you. They're interested in either your services or, they're interested in investing.
Yeah, so you can reach out to me through the Demos website, which is Demos, Demos, funds.io. That's our website where we're posting news about the new companies we're investing in. We also have a presence on LinkedIn, or you can find me on LinkedIn, where I'm constantly posting news of the companies that we're investing in, the work that we're doing for those companies, and all that good stuff.
One more question for you, Eric. Before I ask it, I'm going to invite everybody to go ahead and hit the follow button on their favorite podcast app. We've had a wonderful interview today with Eric Frost from Demos Ventures, and I want you to continue to get more great content like this. So last question for you, Eric. I'm curious to hear, we had a nice conversation here. I hope we stay in touch. Let's say we do. And a year from now, you and I sit down because you're celebrating something. You're very excited. What's that thing that you're celebrating?
We're imminently looking at our first, what they call liquidity event, which means an exit from a fund one company. And that's really what you need to show, we have lots of on paper valuation increases. We're tracking in the top 1% of funds for our very first fund, but really it's that return of capital to investors. That's the rubber hits the road moment. So I think we'll be celebrating that within the next year. We have line of sight for one of those companies into a pending liquidity event. So very excited about that.
Probably don't want to mention their name at this point, I'm guessing.
I can't really say, but
that makes sense. Yeah. And once that happens, like you said, that's sort of like proof of concept. I would think that funds start to flow a lot more freely your way because it's like, okay, we bought into the model up to this point, Eric. We see the value that you guys provide. And now dollars and cents, we can see it on paper too. Like we want to be a part of this, right? That's sort of the mindset
that's exactly investor. Right. Yeah. As soon as you do what you said you were going to do, then people tell their friends about it and recommend you to other people. And you start to have my partner, who's the financial guy who has the fund management experience, has gone through this process. And he's like, we'll get to the point where people are coming to us saying, I really want to invest. And that's after generally you've delivered that value back to your existing investors.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, Eric Frost from Demos, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.